hell is this? Who let you in?
I was invited, Mr. Whitfield.
Invited?
Gregory stepped forward, nose wrinkling like he'd smelled garbage.
Why would anyone invite a stinking, filthy rat?
Gregory.
Mother! Look at her. A rat trying to crawl into a cheesecake.
He grabbed the Bordeaux and poured it onto Audrey Carter's dress. Slowly, red wine seeped through the fabric, pooling at her feet on the marble.
What are you doing?
Giving you wine to go with the cheese. Filthy.
Richard Whitfield chuckled. Patricia covered her mouth, shoulders shaking. Audrey looked down at the stain, then up at Gregory. Her fist clenched, then released.
I hope you'll still be laughing later.
She walked out alone. His parents kept laughing, but they had no idea who the woman they just drenched in wine really was. 12 hours earlier, Audrey Carter stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of her corner office on the 42nd floor of a Manhattan high-rise. Below her, the city moved in its usual rush. Yellow cabs cutting lanes, steam curling from grates, pedestrians weaving through crosswalks without looking up. She didn't notice any of it. Her eyes were fixed on the folder in her hands. Meridian Capital Group. Her name on the door. Her signature on every deal that mattered. At 38, Audrey had built Meridian from a two-person startup in a rented office in Harlem into one of the most aggressive private equity firms on the East Coast. $14 billion in assets under management, offices in New York, London, and Dubai, a reputation for turning dying companies into empires, and for walking away from bad ones without blinking. The folder in her hands was labeled Whitfield Properties, Acquisition Proposal. $1 billion. The biggest single investment Meridian had ever considered. Elena Brooks, her 29-year-old VP of Operations, appeared in the doorway holding 2 coffees and a tablet. "The Whitfield file?" Elena said, handing Audrey a cup. "I finished the deep dive last night." "And?" "The numbers are real. Their luxury resort project in the Carolinas is bleeding cash, $40 million a month. Construction stalled, contractors pulling out. They need $1 billion to finish it or they lose everything, including the family estate." Audrey sipped her coffee. "What about the family?" Elena scrolled through her tablet. "Richard Whitfield, 64, third-generation real estate. Old money, old connections. His wife, Patricia, 61. She runs their foundation, mostly for the tax write-offs. And their son, Gregory, 32. "What's his role?" "Officially? Chief Development Officer." Elena paused. "Unofficially? He shows up to ribbon cuttings and charity galas. Trust fund kid. 3 DUIs, all settled out of court. There's a pattern of complaints from former employees, racial remarks, hostile behavior, but nothing that stuck. The family's lawyers are expensive." Audrey closed the folder. "So they need us more than we need them, by a wide margin. No other firm will touch this deal. The project's too far gone for traditional lenders. Meridian is their last call." Audrey turned back to the window. She'd been here before. Not in this office, not in this suit, but in rooms where someone needed her more than they'd ever admit. She grew up on the south side of Chicago. Her mother, Diane, worked 2 jobs, night shift at a hospital laundry, weekends at a grocery store on 63rd Street. There was no father in the picture, no safety net. Just a woman who ironed her daughter's school uniform every morning and said the same thing at the door. "Make them remember your name." Audrey remembered. Full scholarship to Northwestern, MBA from Harvard, 3 years at Goldman Sachs before she walked out to build something of her own. Every dollar she made twice, once to earn it, once to prove she deserved it. She didn't talk about those years much. She didn't have to. The office, the skyline, the $14 billion, they spoke loud enough. "Richard Whitfield invited me to dinner tonight," Audrey said, still facing the glass. "At their estate in Greenwich." Elena raised an eyebrow. "Dinner before signing?" That's unusual. He wants to meet me in person before the deal closes. Said it's a family tradition. Or he wants to size you up. Audrey smiled faintly. Same thing. She set the folder on her desk. Book the car for 7. I'll go alone. You sure? If they're the kind of people I want to invest $1 billion in, I'll know by dessert. That evening, the black sedan turned through wrought iron gates onto a gravel drive lined with oaks. The Whitfield estate sat at the end, a white colonial mansion, columns glowing under floodlights, cars already parked along the circular driveway. Through the tall windows, Audrey could see guests moving, wine glasses catching light, the flicker of candles on long tables. She stepped out of the car. The air smelled like fresh-cut grass and roasted meat. Music drifted from inside, a string quartet, something classical she recognized but couldn't name. She straightened her dress, simple, black, no jewelry except small diamond studs her mother had given her at graduation, and walked toward the front door. She had no idea what was waiting inside. The front door opened before Audrey could knock. A man in a white jacket, the house butler, looked her up and down. Not quickly, not casually. The kind of look that started at her shoes and ended at her face, as if cataloging everything that didn't fit. May I help you? Audrey Carter. I'm here for the dinner. He hesitated. Just a beat. Long enough for Audrey to notice, short enough for him to deny. Then he stepped aside. This way, ma'am. The foyer was marble from floor to ceiling. A chandelier the size of a small car hung above the staircase, its crystals throwing tiny rainbows across the walls. Oil paintings lined the hallway. Old men in dark suits, jaws set, eyes forward. Whitfield men, going back generations. Not a single face that looked like hers. The butler led her through a set of double doors into a dining room that could seat 30. Tonight it held 16. Men in tailored blazers, women in silk and pearls, all of them white, all of them already holding drinks, all of them turning to look at Audrey as she entered. The conversations didn't stop. They shifted. Voices dropped half a register. Eyes lingered 2 seconds too long. A woman near the fireplace leaned toward her husband and whispered something behind her glass. He glanced at Audrey, then away. The woman smiled, thin, knowing, like she'd just confirmed something she'd suspected. Another guest, a man in a charcoal vest, caught Audrey's eye, then deliberately turned his back. Not rude enough to call out, just rude enough to feel. Patricia Whitfield appeared from the far end of the room. She wore cream-colored Chanel and a string of pearls that sat perfectly against her collarbone. Her smile was precise, not warm, not cold, just practiced. You must be the guest Richard mentioned. Not Audrey, not Ms. Carter, the guest. Audrey Carter, Audrey said, extending her hand. Patricia took it lightly, fingertips only, 2 seconds, then released, as if she'd touched something damp. How lovely. Richard is somewhere around here. I'm sure he'll find you. She turned and walked back toward her circle without introducing Audrey to a single person in the room. Audrey stood alone near the entrance. She had been in boardrooms with hostile investors who tried to break her with silence. She had sat across from hedge fund managers who questioned her credentials to her face. None of it compared to the specific coldness of being invisible in a room full of people who could see you perfectly well. She took a glass of sparkling water from a passing tray and moved toward the windows. Richard Whitfield found her there 5 minutes later. He was tall, silver-haired, tanned in the way that comes from golf courses and yacht decks. His handshake was firm, but his eyes were already past her, scanning the room for someone more important. Miss Carter, good of you to come. We'll talk business tomorrow. Tonight is just social. Of course. Make yourself comfortable. Dinner starts in 20. He patted her shoulder, the way you'd pat a colleague's dog, and moved on without waiting for her response. Audrey watched him cross the room to a cluster of men in matching navy blazers. He said something. 2 of them glanced at her. 1 laughed. Another shook his head slowly like he was watching something unfortunate happen to someone who should have known better. She didn't flinch. She filed it. Dinner was announced at 8:15. A long table, white linen, silver candelabras, name cards in calligraphy. Audrey found hers at the far end, the last seat on the left, pressed against the wall, as far from the hosts as geometry allowed. The seat next to her was empty, not accidentally, deliberately. Every other chair had a name card beside it. Hers had blank space. Across from her sat a retired judge named Thornton, who nodded politely and said nothing. At the head of the table, Richard carved the roast, while Patricia directed staff with small, sharp gestures, a pointed finger here, a raised eyebrow there. Gregory Whitfield sat 3 seats from his father, already on his 4th glass of wine. His collar was open, his tie was gone. His voice was the loudest in the room. Audrey ate quietly. The food was excellent. Seared duck, truffle risotto, a fig salad that tasted like it cost more than her first apartment's rent. She listened. That was what she'd come to do. Gregory was telling a story about a nightclub in Monaco, something about a bottle of champagne and a bouncer who didn't know his last name. The punchline involved money. The table laughed on cue, not because it was funny, but because Gregory was a Whitfield, and Whitfields expected laughter. Then his eyes found Audrey. "Hey," he pointed at her with his fork. "You, down there. What do you do?" 16 faces turned. "I'm in finance," Audrey said. Finance. Gregory repeated the word like it tasted wrong. "What kind of finance? Payday loans? Check cashing?" A few people laughed, short, uncomfortable, but still laughing. "Private equity," Audrey said evenly. Gregory leaned back. "Private equity? That's adorable. Like a little hobby firm? My buddy runs one of those out of his garage." Something like that. A man across the table, silver cufflinks, red pocket square, leaned in. "I believe Ms. Carter runs Meridian Capital, actually." Gregory blinked, then waved it off. Never heard of it. He had. Everyone at that table had. Meridian Capital had been on the front page of the Wall Street Journal twice in 6 months. But Gregory Whitfield didn't care about facts. He cared about the room. He cared about the laugh. "You know what I think?" Gregory said, louder now, playing to the audience. "I think they let anyone call themselves a CEO these days. Affirmative action, diversity quotas. Stick a brown face on the website. Make the shareholders feel warm and fuzzy." He took a long sip of wine. "No offense." The 2 words hung in the air like smoke. Everyone at the table heard them. No one challenged them. Audrey set her fork down. She looked at Gregory the way a surgeon looks at a scan, not with anger, but with precision. "Is that what you think, Mr. Whitfield?" "That's what I know, sweetheart." A woman 2 seats down shifted uncomfortably. Her husband placed a hand on her arm, not in comfort but in warning. "Don't get involved." Patricia cleared her throat from the head of the table. Not a correction, a cue, as if to say, "Enough with that one, darling. Move on." Gregory didn't move on. He was having too much fun. The wine had loosened something in him, something that was always there, just quieter when sober. "You want to hear the truth?" he said, leaning forward. "My father invited you because it looks good. A black face at a Whitfield dinner table. Very progressive, very 2026. But we both know how this works. Tomorrow, you'll sign whatever we put in front of you because that's what people in your position do. You take what you can get." The table went dead silent. Not the polite kind of quiet, the kind where forks stop moving and everyone stares at their plate and pretends the candles are the most fascinating things in the world. Audrey didn't look down. She held Gregory's eyes and let the silence stretch. 3 seconds. 5 seconds. 7. "I'll keep that in mind," she said. She picked up her fork, took a bite of the fig salad, chewed slowly, deliberately, as if nothing had happened. Gregory's jaw tightened. He wasn't used to calm. He was used to people flinching, stumbling over apologies, excusing themselves quietly from the room. Audrey did none of those things. She just kept eating, and that made him furious. He turned to his mother. "Can you believe this? Sitting at our table like she owns the place." Patricia sipped her wine and smiled. "Some people simply don't know their place, darling." Richard said nothing. He sat at the head of the table, cutting his duck into small, precise squares, as though the entire exchange was playing on a screen he could mute whenever he chose. The rest of dinner passed in brittle silence. Dessert arrived, creme brulee and ramekins with gold rims. Audrey finished hers. She complimented the chef through the butler. She said goodnight to Judge Thornton, who finally spoke. "For what it's worth," he said quietly. "I'm sorry about all that." Audrey nodded. "Don't be. It's not your apology to give." When the table moved to the drawing room for after-dinner drinks, Audrey followed, not because she wanted to stay, because she still had a decision to make about a billion-dollar deal, and she wanted to see exactly who these people became when the lights got low and the wine kept flowing. She already had a strong idea, but she was thorough. She always had been. It was how she'd survived every room that didn't want her in it. The drawing room was warmer than the dining room. Smaller, darker, thick with the smell of cigars and aged whiskey. Leather armchairs formed loose circles around a stone fireplace. A bartender in a black vest stood behind a mahogany cart, pouring drinks with the quiet efficiency of someone who'd been told to be invisible. Gregory was already there. He'd traded his wine glass for a tumbler of bourbon. His cheeks were flushed, his eyes were glassy, but his mouth was sharper than ever. Alcohol didn't dull him, it sharpened the worst edges. He stood in the center of the room holding court. 3 men circled him, business associates, golf partners, the kind of men who laughed at anything a Whitfield said because the alternative was being cut from the guest list. Audrey took a seat in a chair near the window. She crossed her legs, held her water, and watched. Gregory noticed. "Oh, she's still here." He said it loud enough for the room. "I figured she'd have taken the hint by now." One of his friends, a man with a signet ring and a receding hairline, chuckled nervously. "Craig, come on." "What? I'm being honest. Look around this room. Does she look like she fits?" Audrey sipped her water. She didn't respond. She didn't need to. Every word Gregory said was a brick he was laying in his own wall, and she was content to let him build it. Patricia entered the room with 2 women from the dinner table. They settled on a settee near the fireplace, speaking in the low, measured tones of women who'd been trained to sound pleasant no matter what they were saying. "She's quite composed, isn't she?" one of them murmured. Patricia smiled. "Some people mistake silence for dignity. It's usually just confusion." The women laughed softly. One of them glanced at Audrey. Audrey caught the glance and held it until the woman looked away. Gregory moved closer. He was gravitating toward Audrey the way some men gravitate toward the thing they most want to break. Not because she'd done anything, because she was still sitting there, calm, upright, unbothered, and that was intolerable to him. He stopped 3 feet from her chair, bourbon in one hand, the other in his pocket. "Let me ask you something," he said. "Honestly, why did you come tonight?" "Your father invited me." "My father invites a lot of people. Charities, causes, photo opportunities." He tilted his head. "Which one are you?" "I'm the one deciding whether to write your family a check for $1 billion. The room shifted. Not visibly, no one moved, but the air changed. A few heads turned. The man with the signet ring set down his glass. Gregory stared at her for a long second. Then he laughed. Loud, theatrical, the kind of laugh designed to shrink whatever came before it. "You? $1 billion?" He turned to the room. "Did you all hear that? She thinks she's the investor." He pointed at Audrey with his glass, bourbon sloshing over the rim. "Sweetheart, the investor we're meeting is a CEO, a real one, not someone who showed up in a $50 dress pretending to matter." "This dress cost $12, Audrey said quietly. "And I am the CEO. Gregory's smile flickered, just for a half second, before he caught it and hardened again. "Right, and I'm the Pope." He turned to his mother. "Mom, did Dad actually tell her she was the investor?" Patricia waved a dismissive hand. "Richard handles the business side, darling. I don't keep track of every name." "Well, someone should." Gregory stepped closer to Audrey, close enough that she could smell the bourbon on his breath, the sharp cologne that didn't quite cover the sweat underneath. "Because I don't know what game you're playing, but it's over. You don't walk into a Whitfield home and pretend to be something you're not." "I haven't pretended anything all evening," Audrey said. "I've told you exactly who I am. You just don't like the answer." Gregory's jaw clenched. His nostrils flared. The veins in his neck pressed against his skin like cables under tension. This was the moment he'd been building toward all night. Not the jokes, not the condescension. Those were warm-ups. This was the part where he proved to the room, to himself, to whatever rotten thing lived inside him, that a black woman couldn't sit in a chair in his house and talk to him like an equal. He looked around the room. Every face was watching. Patricia. Richard, who had appeared in the doorway, arms folded, watching the show like a man reviewing a performance. The men with their bourbons, the women with their crossed ankles. Everyone waiting. Gregory made his decision. He walked to the bar cart, picked up an open bottle of Bordeaux, the same vintage they'd served at dinner, and walked back to Audrey. "You know what you need?" he said, his voice thick and deliberate. "A reality check." And he tilted the bottle. The wine came out in a steady stream, not a splash, not an accident. A pour. Aimed at her chest, soaking through the black fabric of her dress, running down the front in dark red lines, pooling in her lap, dripping off her knees onto the Persian rug beneath her chair. The room gasped, then went silent. Then Gregory laughed, a high, barking sound that bounced off the wood-paneled walls. Richard Whitfield uncrossed his arms. He didn't step forward. He didn't say, "Stop." He chuckled, low, rolling like distant thunder, and shook his head the way a father shakes his head at a child who broke something inexpensive. Patricia pressed her napkin to her lips. Her shoulders trembled, not from horror, from amusement she was too well-bred to fully release. "Gregory," she managed, "don't waste the Bordeaux, darling." That line, that single, practiced, poison-sweet line, cracked the room open. Laughter spread like a stain. The man with the signet ring, the women on the settee, even the bartender looked away too quickly, covering his mouth with his hand. Audrey sat perfectly still. Wine dripped from her chin to her collarbone. It ran between her fingers where they rested on the arms of the chair. The fabric of her dress clung to her skin, heavy and cold. She could feel it soaking through to her stomach, her thighs. She looked down at herself, at the red spreading across her lap, at the drops falling one by one onto the rug, a rug that probably cost more than the apartment she grew up in. Then she looked up at Gregory. He was grinning, waiting, expecting tears, maybe, or a scream, or the satisfying collapse of someone who'd finally been put in her place. What he got was stillness. Audrey unclenched her hands. She placed them flat on her knees. She stood, slowly, wine still running down the hem of her dress, leaving a dark trail on the chair behind her. She did not raise her voice. She did not wipe her face. She looked at Gregory, then at Richard, then at Patricia, one by one, 3 seconds each. "I hope you'll still be laughing later," she said. Then she turned and walked toward the door. Gregory called after her, "Don't forget the service exit, sweetheart." More laughter, Smaller this time. A few people had stopped finding it funny, but none of them said so. The butler opened the front door without a word. He didn't meet her eyes. Audrey stepped outside. The night air hit her wet skin like a slap. Cold, clean, smelling of cut grass and nothing else. She walked down the gravel drive, her heels crunching with each step, wine cooling against her body in the September breeze. She reached her car. The driver, a man named Cole, who had worked for her for 6 years, saw her through the windshield and was out of his seat before she reached the door. "Miss Carter, what happened? Are you—" "I'm fine, Cole." Her voice was steady, flat, not calm the way people are calm when they've made peace with something. Calm the way people are calm when they've made a decision. She pulled her phone from her clutch. The screen glowed against her wine-stained fingers. She dialed Elena. 2 rings. "Audrey, how was dinner?" "Cancel tomorrow's signing. The entire deal. Every document, every clause, every cent." Silence on the other end. Then, "The $1 billion deal?" "All of it." "Audrey, are you sure? This is—" "Elena, cancel it. Tonight." She hung up, leaned back against the leather seat, closed her eyes. The wine was drying on her skin now, sticky and sweet. She could still hear the laughter. Patricia's practiced giggle, Gregory's bark, Richard's low rumble. She could still feel the weight of the bottle tilting, the first cold splash against her chest. She opened her eyes. "Take me home, Cole." The car pulled away from the Whitfield estate. The floodlights grew small in the rearview mirror. The iron gates closed behind them with a heavy clang. Inside the mansion, Gregory Whitfield was pouring himself another bourbon. His parents were saying goodnight to guests. Everyone was shaking hands and smiling. No one checked their phone. No one had any idea what was coming. The next morning, a black Escalade pulled up to Meridian Capital's headquarters in Midtown Manhattan. Richard Whitfield stepped out first, adjusting his tie in the reflection of the revolving door. Patricia followed, clutching her Birkin like a shield. Gregory came last, sunglasses on, coffee in hand, the casual stride of a man who believed today was a formality. $1 billion day, Richard said to his son. "Smile, look sharp. Let me do the talking." Gregory shrugged. "I always do." The lobby was glass and polished concrete. The Meridian Capital logo stretched across the wall in brushed metal letters, clean, silver, enormous. Richard noticed the scale and straightened his posture. Patricia noticed the security guards and tightened her grip on her bag. A receptionist in a navy blazer greeted them. "The Whitfield party? 42nd floor. You're expected." They rode the elevator in silence. Gregory checked his phone. Patricia reapplied lipstick in the mirrored wall. Richard watched the floor numbers climb and felt something tighten in his chest he couldn't explain. The doors opened onto a penthouse floor. Manhattan stretched in every direction through floor-to-ceiling glass, the Hudson to the west, the East River glittering in morning sun, skyscrapers below them like chess pieces on a board. Elena Brooks met them at the elevator. Charcoal suit, leather portfolio, expression completely unreadable. "Mr. Whitfield, Mrs. Whitfield, Gregory," she nodded to each. "Follow me, please." She led them down a corridor lined with framed magazine covers, Forbes, Bloomberg Businessweek, The Wall Street Journal. Richard glanced at them as he passed. One stopped him mid-step. Forbes, 2 years ago. A woman in a navy suit, arms crossed, standing in front of this exact building. The headline, "Audrey Carter, the quiet force behind a $14 billion empire." Richard's face went white. He grabbed Patricia's arm. She looked at the cover, then at Richard, then back at the cover. "Richard," she whispered. "I know." Gregory was 10 steps ahead, still on his phone. He hadn't noticed a thing. Elena opened the conference room door. Glass table, 12 leather chairs, screens on every wall. At the far end of the table, in a high-backed chair, sat Audrey Carter. Navy suit, sharp, tailored, immaculate. Hair pulled back, hands folded on the table. Behind her, the Meridian Capital logo glowed on a screen the size of a theater wall. She looked nothing like the woman at the dinner party, and she looked exactly like her. Gregory lowered his sunglasses. His coffee stopped halfway to his mouth. The color left his face in real time, sliding from his forehead down to his jaw like someone had pulled a drain. "No," he whispered. "No, no, no." Patricia's hand found the back of a chair. She gripped it until her knuckles turned white. Richard stood frozen in the doorway, his mouth opened. Nothing came out. Audrey didn't stand. She didn't need to. "Good morning," she said. Calm, conversational. The same voice she'd used at the dinner table while wine ran down her chest. "Please, have a seat." They sat, not confidently. They sat the way people sit in a principal's office, stiff, small, suddenly aware that every choice they'd made had led them to this chair. Audrey pressed a button. Every screen in the room lit up. Security footage from the Whitfield estate, multiple angles, crystal clear. The dining room, the drawing room, Gregory holding the bottle, the wine pouring, Patricia laughing, Richard chuckling with his arms crossed. The audio was sharp enough to catch every word. "Don't waste the Bordeaux, darling." Patricia flinched like she'd been slapped. Gregory stared at himself on the screen, grinning, flushed, tilting the bottle with both hands. He looked like a stranger. He looked exactly like himself. Audrey let the footage play for 30 seconds, then paused it, frozen on the frame of Gregory laughing, wine still dripping from the bottle in his hand. She reached into a folder and pulled out the Whitfield Properties acquisition agreement. $1 billion. Every page flagged, every signature line blank. She held it up so they could see it. Then, slowly and deliberately, she tore it in half. The sound of ripping paper filled the silent room like a gunshot. She placed the two halves on the table. "Consider this deal canceled. Permanently." Gregory leaned forward. "Miss Carter, Audrey, listen, last night, I had too much to drink. I didn't know." "You didn't know I was someone who mattered." Audrey's voice didn't rise, not even a fraction. "That's the problem, Mr. Whitfield. You thought I was no one, and you treated me the way you treat no one." She stood. "This meeting is over. Elena will show you out." She walked to the window. The skyline stretched below. Same city, same buildings, same sun, but everything in the room behind her had changed. Richard's voice cracked on the first word. "Miss Carter, please, we can discuss." "There's nothing to discuss. You watched your son pour wine on a woman in your home. You laughed. Your wife laughed. And now you want to discuss?" She didn't turn around. "Goodbye, Mr. Whitfield." Elena held the door open. The Whitfields stood, slowly, unsteadily, like people leaving a courtroom after a verdict they hadn't expected. Gregory's hands were shaking. Patricia's mascara had started to run. Richard's jaw was locked so tight, a vein pulsed at his temple. They walked out without a word. The elevator doors closed on three faces that looked nothing like the ones that had arrived 20 minutes earlier. The video surfaced online before the Whitfield's Escalade reached the Lincoln Tunnel. No one knew who uploaded it. One of the dinner guests, probably. Someone who'd filmed it thinking it was funny and posted it thinking it would stay small. It didn't stay small. By noon, the clip had 3 million views on X. By 2 o'clock, it had jumped to TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. By 5, every major news outlet in the country had picked it up. The footage was damning. Not just the wine pour, though that was the image that froze on every thumbnail, every headline, every share. It was everything around it. Gregory's words, Patricia's laughter, Richard's chuckle. The room full of people who watched and did nothing. The headlines wrote themselves. Billionaire's son pours wine on black CEO. Family laughs as she walks out. Whitfield heir humiliates woman at dinner party. Loses $1 billion deal overnight. Hashtag wine on her dress. The moment that ended a real estate empire. The hashtag wine on her dress, climbed to #1 on X within hours. It stayed there for 3 days. People shared their own stories underneath it. Stories about being the only black person in a room. Stories about being mistaken for the help. Stories about smiling through insults because the alternative was worse. Audrey didn't post anything. She didn't need to. The video spoke for itself. Richard Whitfield spent the afternoon on the phone. He called every contact he had. Banks, investors, partners, old friends who owed him favors. None of them picked up. The ones who did kept it short. Richard, we can't be associated with this right now. The optics are impossible. I'm sorry. My board saw the video. We're pulling out. One by one, the pillars holding up Whitfield properties cracked and fell. First National Bank froze their credit line. $200 million. Gone with a single email. The Harrington Group, their co-developer on the Carolina resort, issued a public statement terminating the partnership effective immediately. Sterling & Associates, their law firm of 18 years, quietly declined to represent them going forward. By the end of the first day, Whitfield Properties had lost access to over $400 million in financing. By the end of the second day, their stock, traded on a small regional exchange, had dropped 41%. Richard sat in his study at the Greenwich estate, staring at his phone. The same room where Gregory had poured the wine, the same rug, still stained. The same chair where Audrey had sat, still pushed back from where she'd stood and walked away. He looked at the stain on the rug. It was the shape of a small country. He couldn't stop looking at it. Patricia tried damage control. She recorded a video apology from the living room. Hair done, pearls on, reading from a script her publicist had written in 45 minutes. Our family deeply regrets the events of that evening. We are committed to learning and growing. The internet ate her alive. The comments were merciless. She's wearing the same pearls from the video. Read the room. Crocodile tears from a crocodile. You weren't sorry when you were laughing, Patricia. She deleted the video after 6 hours. By then, it had been screen-recorded, remixed, and turned into a meme that would outlive her grandchildren. Gregory was served papers on a Wednesday morning. 2 police officers arrived at the Greenwich estate at 8 a.m. He answered the door in a bathrobe, eyes swollen, unshaved. They handed him a summons. The charge? Assault in the 3rd degree. The deliberate pouring of a substance on another person's body without consent. His lawyer told him it was minor, a misdemeanor, manageable. Then, the district attorney's office announced they were exploring hate crime enhancement. The wine pour, combined with Gregory's recorded statements about race, met the threshold for bias-motivated conduct under New York state law. Gregory's lawyer stopped calling it minor. The family gathered in Richard's study that evening. No staff, no guests, just the 3 of them. Richard in his chair, Patricia on the couch with a glass of white wine she hadn't touched, Gregory pacing by the window. "This is your fault," Richard said to his son. Not shouting. Worse. The flat, dead tone of a man who'd already calculated the loss and found it total. "My fault?" Gregory stopped pacing. "You laughed too. Both of you laughed." No one answered, because he was right. And because being right didn't change a thing. Outside the window, the oak trees along the driveway stood motionless in the dark. The same trees Audrey had driven past the night everything changed. The same gravel. The same iron gates. But the house behind them was already falling apart. 2 weeks later, Gregory Whitfield walked into the Stamford Superior Courthouse wearing a suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent. His lawyer, a silver-haired man named Howard Pemberton from one of Connecticut's oldest firms, walked beside him, carrying a briefcase and a confidence that would not survive the morning. The courtroom was packed, every seat taken. Reporters lined the back wall, cameras held low, notebooks open. Outside, a crowd had gathered on the courthouse steps, signs, megaphones, a chant that carried through the windows. "Justice for Audrey! Justice for all!" Gregory sat at the defense table and stared straight ahead. He didn't look at the gallery. He didn't look at the cameras. He looked at the judge's empty chair and tried to keep his hands from shaking. The charges were read. Assault in the 3rd degree. Hate crime enhancement under Connecticut General Statutes Section 53A-181J. The prosecution argued that Gregory's actions, pouring wine on Audrey Carter while making racially charged remarks, constituted bias-motivated assault. The evidence was the video. The video was everything. The prosecution played it in full, every second. The courtroom watched Gregory on the screen, laughing, pouring, mocking. They heard Patricia's voice. "Don't waste the Bordeaux, darling." They heard the room erupt in laughter. They heard Audrey's footsteps walking out. When the video ended, the courtroom was silent. Not the respectful silence of a funeral, the heavy silence of people who just witnessed something they couldn't unsee. 3 witnesses took the stand. The first was Judge Thornton, the retired judge who'd sat across from Audrey at dinner and said nothing all evening. He testified that Gregory's behavior had been sustained, deliberate, and racially motivated. When asked why he hadn't intervened, he paused for a long time before answering. "I was a coward," he said. "I sat there and I let it happen. That's something I'll carry." The second witness was a woman named Claire Davenport, one of the dinner guests. She described the atmosphere in the room as like a sport. She said Gregory had been targeting Audrey all evening, that his comments had escalated from dismissive to hostile to physically aggressive. When asked if anyone had tried to stop him, she shook her head. No one wanted to be the one to say something. It was the Whitfields' house. Their rules. The third witness was Elena Brooks. She testified about the phone call she'd received from Audrey that night. The tone of Audrey's voice, the instruction to cancel the deal, the sound of wine still dripping in the background of the call. Her voice broke once on the word dripping. She recovered and continued. Howard Pemberton made his case. He argued that Gregory had been intoxicated, that the wine pour was a lapse in judgment, not an act of hatred, and that his client was willing to undergo sensitivity training and make a public apology. The judge, a woman named Victoria Hayes, 61, known for her patience and her refusal to tolerate theatrics, listened without expression. When Pemberton finished, she removed her glasses and spoke directly to Gregory. "Mr. Whitfield, I have reviewed the footage. I've heard the testimony, and I want to be clear about something. What I saw in that video was not a lapse in judgment. It was a performance. You poured wine on a woman to entertain a room. You did it because you believed there would be no consequences. You were wrong." She sentenced him to 18 months of probation, 200 hours of community service at the Stamford Community Center, a predominantly black neighborhood organization, and mandatory completion of a racial bias education program. Any violation would convert the sentence to 6 months in county jail. Gregory's hands gripped the table. His lawyer placed a hand on his shoulder. Gregory shrugged it off. But the courthouse was not done with the Whitfield family. The same week, the Securities and Exchange Commission announced a formal investigation into Whitfield properties. The collapse of the Meridian Capital deal had triggered a mandatory audit of the company's books, and what the auditors found was worse than anyone expected. Falsified revenue projections on the Carolina Resort project, inflated appraisals submitted to lenders, a pattern of financial misrepresentation stretching back at least 4 years. Richard Whitfield had been building his empire on numbers that didn't exist. The SEC filed civil charges against Richard personally. The Department of Justice opened a parallel criminal inquiry. Richard's passport was flagged. His accounts were frozen. Whitfield Properties, 3 generations of wealth, a name that had once meant power in every boardroom from Greenwich to Palm Beach, was forced into a fire sale. The Carolina resort, half-built and bleeding money, was sold to a development group for pennies on the dollar. The Greenwich estate was listed. The Manhattan office was shuttered. Patricia stopped appearing in public. She canceled her foundation events, closed her social media accounts, and was reportedly staying with her sister in Vermont. A source close to the family told the press she hadn't spoken to Richard in days. Gregory completed his first week of community service at the Stamford Community Center on a Tuesday morning. He spent 4 hours sorting donated clothing in a basement that smelled like detergent and old carpet. The woman supervising him, a retired teacher named Dorothy Wallace, didn't know who he was. She handed him a bin of children's coats and told him to organize them by size. He did it without a word. Meanwhile, Audrey Carter stood on the stage of the Forbes Women's Summit in front of 2,000 people. The applause when she walked out lasted 45 seconds. She waited for it to stop. Then she spoke. "I didn't cancel that deal for revenge," she said. "I canceled it because I sat in a room full of people who watched a man pour wine on me and laughed. And I realized that if I gave them $1 billion, I would be telling them that behavior has no price." She paused. "It does. It always does." The audience rose to their feet. The applause was louder this time, not polite, not obligatory, the kind that comes from the chest. 3 days later, Time magazine released its new cover. Audrey Carter in her navy suit, arms crossed, looking directly into the camera. The headline read, "The woman who said no to $1 billion and won." Audrey saw it on Elena's phone that morning. She looked at it for a long time. Then she set the phone down and went back to work. There was still a lot to build. 6 months passed. The Whitfield name, once printed on buildings and charity mastheads, had become something else. A cautionary tale. A punchline. A case study in business ethics courses at 3 universities. Richard Whitfield settled with the SEC for $14 million and a lifetime ban from serving as an officer of any public company. The man who once dined with governors now met bankruptcy attorneys in a rented office above a dry cleaner in Stamford. The Greenwich estate sold at auction for less than half its value. A tech executive from San Jose bought it. He never learned about the stain on the drawing room rug. Patricia moved to Vermont permanently. A farmhouse outside Montpelier, far from the circles she'd once commanded. She stopped wearing pearls. She stopped giving interviews. When a reporter tracked her down, she closed the door without speaking. It was perhaps the most dignified thing she'd done in years. Gregory completed his 200 hours of community service at the Stamford Community Center on a cold morning in March. His last assignment was painting the walls of a reading room used by after-school kids, most of them black, most of them from families that had never heard of Bordeaux or Greenwich dinner parties. A girl, maybe 8, watched him from the doorway. "Are you in trouble?" Gregory stopped painting. "Yeah, I am." "What did you do?" "I was mean to someone who didn't deserve it." "Did you say sorry?" "I tried." "Did she forgive you?" "No." The girl nodded, as if that made perfect sense. Then she went back to her book. Gregory finished the wall, signed his paperwork, and walked into the cold air. He stood on the sidewalk for a long time, watching cars pass. He didn't call anyone. He just stood there, feeling the weight of something he couldn't put down. Weeks earlier, he'd written Audrey a letter, handwritten on plain paper. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He wrote about the reading room, about Dorothy Wallace, who still didn't know his last name, about the girl who asked if he was in trouble. He wrote, "I never once thought about what it felt like to be the person I was talking to. I do now. I don't know if that matters to you. It matters to me." Audrey read the letter at her desk, alone, door closed. She read it twice, then folded it carefully, placed it in the top drawer, and closed it. She didn't reply. Some things don't need a response. They just need to be heard. That same week, Audrey launched the Carter Foundation, a nonprofit funding Black entrepreneurs shut out of traditional venture capital. Initial endowment, $25 million. Elena Brooks, now senior vice president, was named executive director. In its first quarter, the foundation funded 52 startups across 14 states. A bakery in Detroit, a biotech lab in Atlanta, a children's publishing house in Oakland. Each one built by someone who'd been told they didn't belong at the table. Audrey didn't attend the launch gala. She sent a recorded message instead. Short, direct, no script. I started this because I sat in a room where someone decided I was nothing, and I want to make sure the next woman who walks into that room has something I didn't. A door she built herself. On a Friday evening in April, Audrey stood at her corner office window on the 42nd floor. The sun set behind the Hudson, turning the water gold and copper. Manhattan stretched below, the same skyline she'd looked at the morning before the Whitfield dinner, the morning she'd held the folder and weighed a billion-dollar decision. She was still that woman. She'd always been that woman. The difference was that now the world knew it too. So let me ask you, have you ever been in a room where someone made you feel like you didn't belong? What did you do? And what do you wish you'd done? Drop your story in the comments. Stories like this don't just need to be told, they need to be heard. Share this with someone who needs it. And if you haven't already, subscribe, because